Hello, welcome back to Three Orcs. This is David. Today, I'm going to cover the history of Verbobonc in relation to the History of Greyhawk box set and the Living Greyhawk series. I'm going to try my best to go over this. The goal of this video is to show the results of all the investigation that we have done over the years. I've been discussing this at great length with other authors like Sam Weiss and Joseph Block and some others that you'll see in these articles I'll bring up. But after many discussions and interviews and articles written, I decided that I needed to create a firm foundation of the history of the Verbobonc area. That way, when a Dungeon Master runs the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign, they'll have a firm grasp on the local history. That way they can bring the campaign to life. All the NPCs and organizations in the area need a firm foundation of a history to go by. And that's what the goal of this article was. I have to admit that I'm not an expert on some of these subjects, like Vecna. Where Sam Weiss, he's the author of a lot of that, and he would be the subject matter expert on that point of view. And the discussions he's had with Gary Hallane, he wrote quite a few articles, including mysterious places for the Living Greyhawk series. When I'm writing articles for the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign, and I'm developing these local towns and local organizations, I need a firm foundation of the history of the place, those organizations, their position on what's been happening lately, and the politics involved. And that's all very important to consider when you're writing this stuff up. That way it becomes more realistic, it makes the games come alive and be more engaging. It's the kind of work that a Dungeon Master would do behind the scenes. It's the kind of work that an author of a novel series would do before writing his book. Now, I know a lot of Dungeon Masters like to run their campaigns off the cuff, but you're only allowed to do that if you have the material given to you so you can run it off the cuff. Somebody else did all that work for you. Like, for example, the box set of the World of Greyhawk. Gary Gygax wrote that for you to run your campaign in. If you didn't have that box set, you'd be running your campaign in a vacuum. That's how important this stuff is. So that way somebody else is doing the legwork for you. That way you can just run your own campaigns. And that's the goal of my website, Verbobonc Campaign Guide 576 Common Year, so you can run the original Temple of Elemental Evil campaign, T1 through T4 module, the way Gary Gygax wanted. And in fact, he says that in the module. He stated in interviews and in the module that he expected the Dungeon Master to expand this campaign, to flush it out. He couldn't do it because it would be 1,000 pages. They can't publish it in the 80s. I keep saying that. But even Nulb, there's only 4 locations in the module. They couldn't possibly flush it out for you because it would make the module too big. So they even stated that the Dungeon Master is expected to do that. That they're just like the village of Hamlet. Yes, Nulb wasn't. Only 4 locations and some NPCs were, and you were expected to do the rest. Also, he stated that there was other Temple of Elemental Evil outposts out in the world besides the Moat House. In fact, Wizards of the Coast, that Apocalypse module, they went with that idea, and they created other outposts out there for each earth, wind, air, and fire within 10 miles of the Temple of Elemental Evil, which I think is really cool, and I'm using it in my campaign world. When you're looking at my interactive maps, you can, as a Dungeon Master, take or leave it. If there's a dungeon located on the map in the DM view only, you're welcome to use it, or you don't have to use it in your campaign. But at least it's there for you to consider. That way it gives you options. And you never know what your players are going to do in the campaign. Maybe they're just going to go carousing down in the south of I County along the Sleem border, getting into all sorts of trouble down there. There's certainly a lot of quests down there, as you know from the modules I published on the Dungeon Masters Guild. All that stuff is on the World Anvil website too for you to use with the interactive maps. So that way you just click on the location, it'll pop up the article with all the artwork and maps. You'll be able to use it at the table. That's the goal of the website. So we're going to talk about the history of Verbobonc. It's quite a complicated subject because the history of Greyhawk is quite complicated. Over the years, it's been extended, expanded, rewritten, and reimagined many times by different authors, from Carl Sargent to Sam Weiss to Hallane, those kind of writers, Living Greyhawk writers, and then different editions of D&D like 3rd and 4th and 5th, redoing things and changing things, not always for the better. So my goal for my website is to stick to canon as closely as possible for all locations I develop. That means anything in the original box set or any of those other supplements, I try to stick with the core. The only thing I do is expand upon it. So if it's only like a little paragraph of this little village somewhere in the gnarly forest, I take that information, consider all the information in the area, pull in all the lore, and then I create the whole town from scratch with all the NPCs and the different organizations like the Gnarly Rangers, the Druids of the Gnarly. I take all that in, build up the NPCs there, and layer it with quests and things like that. So I'm not changing nothing. I'm expanding upon it. For me to be able to do that well, I need a really good history. To be specific, I don't need the history of Greyhawk. I need the history of the Verbobonc area, which is very specific because a lot of things happened in that area over the centuries. And so I got together with a lot of notable authors to go over this in detail and figure this stuff out, because not only do we have the history of the world to consider, but all these modules are written in the area. Those authors of those modules definitely lean towards ancient lore from Greyhawk, but it wasn't always consistent or accurate. And so that's why all this work had to be done. I wanted to make sure I had a solid article to go with before moving forward. So I'm going to go ahead and show that to you, and we'll talk about it a little bit. All right, we're back at the screen of my Temple of Elemental Evil campaign website, the Verbobonc Campaign Guide 576 Common Year. You can follow along if you like. It's a public-facing website that follows the Wizards of the Coast content policy, and you can use this at your table in your campaign. There's over 1,500 articles, a lot of artwork and maps, but what's great about it is it's there for you to use if you need it or want it. So you can build upon your campaign to give it more engaging depth. If you go to the table of contents on the lower left, under Politics, Law, and History, I have the Historical Tapestry of Verbobonc. So this article was written with the help of Sam Weiss and Damien, and he's from Australia, and they've all written articles for Dragon, Dungeon, and Living Greyhawk. I took the core lore of what we do know, and then their articles they wrote over the years. We put this together with a lot of edits. If you see anything off or wrong about this, please comment below or come to our Three Orcs Discord. We talk about this every day, all day long, working on this campaign. Currently, I'm working on Twilight Falls. I just created it there, as you've seen probably on Facebook where I posted it, or on my Patreon. We collaborate every day with other Dungeon Masters running this campaign, locations and NPCs that we add to this campaign. You know, because a lot of these Dungeon Masters have been running it for 40 years, and they did run it or create articles or modules for Living Greyhawk too. And so they're all contributing in their own way. Right now I'm working on Twilight Falls with the help of Damien, and he's a great resource. And it's looking really good right now. So we got into talking about that location. Now that location has some Flan history to it from like the 3000th century, something like that. But I'll show you here in the article. Negative 3000 to negative 440 Common Year. So Verbobonc as a city is of historical significance and cultural diversity. It's rich with an intricate past, as you're going to see here in a moment. Now, I wrote a little I wrote a little message here for the reader to explain some of the stuff before I get into the article. So basically, this is a glimpse into Verbobonc's past. It's a rich tapestry, and it offers only a glimpse of this intricate saga over this region. The historical highlights inspired by references of the history of Verbobonc, referencing a section called The History of Verbobonc from the esteemed Journal of the Wanderer, The Wayfarer's Guide to Verbobonc. That's the guide by Living Greyhawk. Now, they created their own history of this area. In fact, they're the ones that attempted this the first time. This campaign I'm running is the original Temple of Elemental Evil campaign, as Gary Gygax intended. More of a sandbox, open type campaign, more of an epic version. Not just running the dungeon from the pages like a dungeon slog. This is a campaign. And you're doing a lot of adventuring, a lot of role-playing outside of the dungeon in the area of Verbobonc and the Gnarly Forest, the Cron Hills, Divers, the Wild Coast. And I needed this reference. So Living Greyhawk attempted, or did, create a history version of this area. But their skew is after the Greyhawk Wars and starting at the year 594 Common Year on up. And so their history is going to be a little bit different. Also, they did not take into account these other articles by Sam Weiss with Vecna and the Urflan. So that's kind of been omitted. And also, anything that's all past the 5 78 Common Year I kind of omitted from my articles because it hasn't happened yet in this campaign we're running. Sometimes I add a few tidbits as a possible future event. With the assistance of the Verbobonc Council and the Triad, who I am communication with sometimes, we talk about this stuff, it's important to acknowledge that these accounts represent snapshots of pivotal moments, carefully selected to convey the essence of this Verbobonc journey. The full depth of the Verbobonc past, replete with its triumphs and tribulations and transformations, is far more expansive and complex than be captured in this overview. I highly recommend that you read the original history of Greyhawk from the World of Greyhawk box set and the Verbobonc Living Greyhawk books, and the Living Greyhawk Wayfarer's Guide that you probably get on DM's Guild. So the reason I'm saying that is because, like I said, these web pages are meant to be used at the table while you're running the game, while you're role playing. It's really hard to role play and use this information from books at the table. It's hard to reference, to find something, to look something up really quick. So each event, character, and epoch mentioned here is but a thread in this vast history. Let's start from the very beginning. The gnomish and elven origins. So I start off with a brief section of where the gnomes and elves came from, just to give you a foundation. I didn't go into a lot of detail. There is a lot more detail that can be found in those articles I mentioned, but you really don't need that at the table. You just need a mention, so that way you're not lost with this whole thread of what the history involved is. So the early settlement of the Bonc was a settlement along the Velverdiver River. The fort was named Verbobonc, and it had elven influence. Before the human dominance, it was an elven military town aligned with Grey Elves of Anstad, which is in Selene, the Fey kingdom of the elves, to the south. So it has extensive elven architecture. That's important, because when you're role-playing in the city of Verbobonc, that elven architecture should be part of your descriptions as they're going through the city. The shared governance, the elves of Greyhawk, the elves and the gnomes coexisted in the area and defended against external threats. The first human settlements, negative 3,000 Common Year. This is a long time before the migrations of the humans to this land from the west. The first era of human civilization was the emergence of two major Euroflan nations. They are steeped in dark sorcery and necromantic rule. This is important because your players, or you as a dungeon master, can develop these runes that players will find in the campaign, which I've created too. You'll see that on the website. In fact, that Twilight Falls I mentioned earlier, yeah, there is one of those ruins there nearby, which has a lot to do with the area. They wielded great power across the central Flanaess, legacy that lingers to this day. The first of these nations was the Thaumaturchy of the Isle of Woe. It's a priest-ruled empire that commanded the coast of the Nive Dive and the inland trade routes. It was basically an island in the middle of the Nive Dive, and it vanished under the waters one day, sank beneath the waters in negative 2,000 Common Year. Its remnant cities, particularly Tekron, continued to exert control over the inland territories. So that's interesting stuff. However, the expansion along the Velverdiva would draw the wrath of a fierce power, the occluded empire of the Whispered One, ruled by the Arch-Lich Vecna. Seeking to crush the rival Flan dominions, Vecna launched a brutal conquest. So this whole section is about the war with Vecna and what he's done. And as you can see by looking at this article, only so much has been covered here. If you read the original articles, it's a really massive history document. But you really don't need to know most of that stuff when you're running the game at the table. This right here is good enough. There's a timeline here. Number 2000, the Isle of Woe sank. Vecna destroys that clan, and the Elves of Selene and the Lost Kingdom of Luna fought Vecna, but the extent of the damage to Verbobonc is unknown. So there isn't a lot of lore for the actual Verbobonc, the city of Verbobonc area along the Velverdiver River, but you could assume there probably was a couple of ruins, some outposts, and Samwise admitted to that. That's possible. It makes sense. So I created a dungeon for that. The Twin Cataclysms. This is where the migration started at negative 440 Common Year. It was just really interesting because that lasted till negative 100 Common Year. And right now my campaign's 578 Common Year. So it's not really all that long ago. So the Flan empires collapsed in negative 440, consumed by war, and the new power was rising. So after that twin cataclysm, the Sul and the Bakluni reshaped the Flan, sending waves of refugees in all directions, as you probably all know. So as you can see from this section, it's a brief, bullet-pointed section for this entire massive history of the migrations. But it's enough for you to get up to speed while we're playing at the table. And then number 3 is the Volandi Uridans. So it's the rise of the Gnome-Elf alliance between -100 and 1 common year. Following the chaos of the previous centuries, the Iridian group, the Volandi Oreds, arrived between -100 and 1 common year, unlike the earlier Ardi and Niri, who passed east. The Volandi stayed, establishing petty kingdoms and fortified settlements throughout the region. The Volandi warrior kings fought back against the humanoid occupiers, liberating many gnomish strongholds and forging alliances with the elves of Selene. By 1 common year, the scattered states stabilized and soon would be absorbed by the expanding great kingdom of Ardi to the east. So there's a little brief history there of a nugget of what happened in those other huge mega historical articles I referred to earlier. So 4, the formation of modern Verbobonc. So between 8 and 117 common year, the Volandi states, weakened by internal feuds, the great kingdom of Ardi expanded into the region in the 2nd century common year. They formally incorporating it into the viceroyalty of Thurond by 117 common year. There's a lot of debate about this, and they had to do a lot of research to figure this out, to get the right dates. However, before this, a critical moment in Verbobonc's history occurred in 8 common year, when the community embarked on an ambitious effort to rebuild its ancient defenses, led by the famed gnome architect Snithraglin. New Verbobonc was established, a fortified settlement embracing its gnome, elf, and human heritage. However, as the humans settled in greater numbers, Verbobonc transitioned into a major trade port, leading to the gradual departure of many elves, who retreated to the depths of Selene's forest to the south. So those are the key facts. The conclusion here is Verbobonc history is not merely human, elven, and gnomish, but all 3 entwined. Its earlier days under the Urflan rule, an arrival of the Uridans, and the rise of trade. The city embodies a legacy of war, resilience, and adaptation. The Flan, Vecna, Elves of Luna, the Gnomes of the Cron Hills, and the Iridan Volandi all shaped its fate. By the time Ardi arrived in 117 common year, Verbobonc was already a city deep of history and diverse heritage. This is important because this pretty much explains the vibe of what Verbobonc is like, why the gnomes are so upset, and why they are on the Council of Lords with the human lords, and what kind of human races of Greyhawk are common in this area. Okay, let's go ahead and get up to speed here. So the era of political change in 117. Verbobonc transitioned from elven gnomish stronghold under the Thurundian rule to a noble-led province under the growing influence of Thurundi and Veluna. This period now saw the rule of the first Viscount, the Kiois occupation, its liberation, and the rise of St. Cuthbert's Church. So 117 to 254 common year. The Ardi's western expansion waning, Verbobonc was formally incorporated into the viceroyalty of Thurond in 117. Under the administration of Veluna, this strengthened its role as a defensive outpost and river trade way station. Although it remained secondary to Divers as a trade hub, Thurond's governance introduced structured noble rule, blending existing elven and gnome traditions with Uridan feudal law. Unlike Divers, which flourished as a major trade center, Verbobonc's importance was primarily strategic, protecting the river trade route along the Velverdiva. Because you remember the long merchant road that goes from City of Greyhawk west all the way to Nyrond or something like that. So basically, the River 2, the Velverdiva, is a major artery of trade between the City of Greyhawk and the west. So that definitely needs to be protected. And also you got to remember that this land here is all along the gnarly Welkwood area and along the Lort Mills through the Cron Hills, all to the south. Before the Hateful Wars, there was a lot of humanoid activity in those Lort Mill Mountains and Cron Hills. They had to protect that trade route. The rise of Viscount Ramsay and the Furandi's claim. So 254 to 355, more research to get that right. In 254, Furandy declared independence from Ardi, the kingdom of Ardi way to the east. They asserted full control over Veluna, Verbobonc, Divers, and the Shield Lands. To solidify this rule, King Thrommel I appointed Ramsay, a loyal noble, as the first Viscount of Verbobonc. That took some investigation to figure it out, too. Well, none of this stuff is very clear in a lot of these articles. After talking to the experts, we hammered this out, and they're pretty satisfied with this. If you, like I said before, if you have any comments or adjustments or edits you want to see, say that below or come to our Discord. We can talk about it. So Viscount Ramsay was the military-minded leader. He oversaw the fortification of Verbobonc, expanded the noble class, including the Furondi loyalists who maintained ties with Luna's clergy. Under his rule, Verbobonc remained semi-autonomous, balancing its allegiance between Furondi and Luna. Ramsay's rule lasted about a century, securing the Viscounty's stability and prosperity, until the invasion by Keeland in 350 Common Year, marking the start of the Long War. We had a long discussion about the Long War. The Long War is a lot longer than you would think. So the actual war is 350 to 355, but it actually extended a lot longer than that because of the way the skirmishes and invasions were happening through the years. And I'll get to that in a minute here. But that took a lot of thinking to get our heads wrapped around it. So in 254, Viscount Ramsay was appointed. Ramsay fortified Verbobonc. He maintained diplomatic ties with Luna, and he ruled until the Kiowas invasion of 355. Then he was either killed in battle or forced into exile. If you have a thought about that, let me know. 3. Keeland's invasion and Long War. So that here is like 6 years. In 350, Keelan launched an invasion into southern Voluna and western Verbobonc, marking the start of what would later be called the Long War. By the way, that's where the halflings came from in Littleborough. They were displaced during the war. That's how they arrived there. Just a side note, because I created that village too. Basically, the war officially ended in 355, officially with the Treaty of Darvanish. But Keelan maintained occupation of Verbobonc for the next 80 years. So you could call that the Long War. The war was formally ended. Although the war was formally ended, Voluna and the local resistant forces viewed Keelan's continued presence as part of this ongoing struggle. They contributed to the Long War nature. Compounding Keelan's problem, the simultaneous war with Ket never fully ended, as resistance remained constant, forcing Keelan to divert resources away from Verbobonc. It kind of reminds me of Germany in World War II. Okay, so that's what happened there. The Short War and Liberation in 436 to 438, like 3 years there. In 436 Common Year, Keeland initiated another military campaign, seeking to solidify its rule under Verbobonc and continue its conquest of Luna. However, this sparked the Short War. As Furondi and Luna responded with significant military counteroffensive, the conflict ended in 438 Common Year with a decisive victory for Furondi and Luna, forcing Keelan to retreat and ceding Bissell to Furondi as a protective buffer state. Can you imagine what would have happened if Keelan won that war? Okay, so 5. Religious and political shifts. In 438 to 529, we're getting really close now to the current date. Following the Short War, Verbobonc remained a vassal of Furondi and Luna, still. But its governance shifted. The rise of St. Cuthbert began to replace the religious dominance there, particularly among the noble and military. By 529 Common Year, Verbobonc distanced itself from direct Volunese oversight, choosing not to participate in the court of Mittrick. Mittrick is the capital of Furondi. However, by the late 6th century Common Year, Verbobonc re-established ties with Mittrick, forming alliances that would become critical in the fight against the Temple of Elemental Evil, as you all know. All right, so those are the key facts of that era. Now we're going to move on to the Temple of Elemental Evil. This is basically a short blurb of what happened, the nexus of evil, the increasing raids, efforts to contain the threat by the Gnarly Rangers and the Mounted Borderers and the local woodsmen of the Gnarly and the gnomes from the Gnome Cron Hills. Then I added some bullet points for the Battle of Emridy Meadows that happened on those timelines, so you can quickly reference that, even though it's not the full article. In fact, the full article is right here. So everything's that's in red, it's a hyperlink to the full articles of other subjects. As you can see, they all have their own artwork too, maps and more sublinks to other articles. Everything's interconnected here. What pops up is a mini article. If you want to click on the full article to read the whole thing, you have to click on it again to open it up into another tab. The Second Rising now. Now that's what campaign I'm running right now. That's what the goal of this campaign website is for, is the Second Rising of the Temple of Elemental Evil. So the Second Rising, a resurgence of evil forces known as the Second Rising, occurred in the late 570s at Hamlet. In response, Viscount Wilfric ordered the construction of a castle being built in Hamlet, as you know from the T1 module. Adventurers' involvement, numerous adventuring parties engaged in the temple and got slaughtered at the bottom of the moat house, and continued onwards to get slaughtered again in the Temple of Elemental Evil. What fun. So this is the conclusion. So in the period of Verbobonc's history, it marked the struggle between the pervasive evil that threatened the very fabric of the region and the tales of valor and sacrifice during the battles against the Temple of Elemental Evil. It became a legendary, shaping the collective memory and identifying the people of Verbobonc. The events serve as a testament to the resilience of the diverse communities within the Viscounty. I mentioned earlier that there is a lot of research involved and other authors. So let's go ahead and scroll to the bottom. These are the key revisions. I spelled them out for you, so that way you can reference this. If you have any problems with any of this, or suggestions, or edits, or comments, look at this first, because this is some of the corrections and fixes we used and why. This might help. It was just really interesting, because like the human arrival and growth was two distinct periods. That's something different, something that wasn't considered before. The introduction of the Urflan, that's another thing, because of the Vecna stuff. Expanded on the destruction of Tekron by Vecna, that's a big thing. Clarified the Eruidan migrations in 2 waves. Added details on the humanoid invasions, expanding the founding of New Boak. So all this stuff is pretty important. And at the very bottom is the sources and acknowledgments I've done with Samuel Weiss and Gary Holland and some other resources I used to create this article. So I hope you like this. I hope you like what you've seen so far, because this is a concise, abridged history of the location around Verbobonc to be used in the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign. Let me know your thoughts below. Thank you for watching. I hope you like what you've seen so far, and this will hold a lot of value for running the Temple of Elemental Evil campaign. If you want to see more of this and all the locations and NPCs and organizations, all the work we've done for running this temple campaign as an open sandbox epic version, come to the Verbobonc campaign site on World Anvil, and you can use it for your campaign there. Or you can come to the Three Orcs Discord channel and talk or collaborate with us to work on this.
Did you enjoy video? Consider tossing support on my Patreon. It's best way to support orcs. If you would like to see more content, subscribe and post comments below. It better not be bad.
So I hope your players enjoy this campaign as much as mine have, and may your dice ever roll true.